Hi guys, it's Tziporah here. In this video, I'm going to share with you information on something that a lot of people struggle with, and that is separating ourselves from our emotions. And this can be one of the trickier areas to heal and overcome when doing inner child work. So I'm going to talk about why people's emotions might become part of their self-identity, and I'm also going to give examples of how a person's emotional experiences can become part of that self-identity. And unfortunately, this is one of the things that abusive people scan and look for in order to find a target. So it's very important to work on and heal. Where can this inability to separate our emotions come from? Because it is usually from childhood emotional neglect, it is from something that did not happen, which means it is harder to look for and recall in order to work on. And this means that your emotional needs were not met, which is a lacking, whereas more overt traumatic abuse is easier to see in order to work on. Why might childhood emotional neglect affect someone so much with separating themselves from their emotions? It's because emotions are our first language. And when that language is not nurtured and tended to, we don't learn how to process, regulate, and separate ourselves from our emotional experiences. And children see the world as a reflection of themselves. Now, this doesn't mean that the parents knew they were doing this or were trying to do it. It just means that that was what happened. The emotional needs were not met. On the other hand, it could mean that there was more overt neglect, even abuse. The child could have been met with disgust, disdain, criticized, or even punished for their emotional expressions or emotional experiences. Or maybe the parent has expectations of the child that aren't happening and they are not able to handle it in a healthy, supportive way. It could also be that the parent always addressed things with toxic positivity, meaning everything was, it's okay, don't worry about it. And this doesn't help the child get through and process situations. It kind of just tries to make the emotions go away. So as you can see, there are different ways in which this emotional neglect can happen. And whatever the case, it means that the child was not nurtured and helped in separating themselves from their emotions by processing them, understanding them, validating them. And this makes them become their emotions rather than an emotion happening to them. Okay, so what are some examples of this inability to separate ourselves from our emotions? An example is if a child does something that feels wrong or embarrassing, they begin to feel guilty or shameful. Now, if they don't know how to label, validate, process, and regulate that emotion, they start feeling like they themselves are a guilty or shameful or bad person. Whereas in a healthy upbringing, the child is taught that this is an emotional experience of guilt or shame, and it is not them as a bad or guilty person. This labeling and processing is done with the help of the parent. In regards to being made fun of, criticized, or punished for their emotional experiences, they might start feeling like they are worthy of punishment for having emotions, or that they might as well not even address the emotions because they're going to be ridiculed for them. And then they end up learning to bury their emotions, and then they don't know what to do with these emotions and their emotional experiences moving forward. And they might even come out in unpleasant ways in the future. Unaddressed emotions become subconscious messages, and these messages linger around and affect us daily. And unfortunately, they can get us into abusive situations or taken advantage of. Because if we feel like we are a bad or guilty or shameful person, abusive people will play on that. Abusive people will make you feel a certain way. So if they make you feel guilty or shameful and you have a hard time separating yourself from these emotions, then you might subconsciously feel that you deserve this abuse or that you're not worthy of speaking up about the abuse. We need to be able to label and recognize our emotions in order to understand, validate, and process them to move forward. It also helps us to integrate good and bad emotional experiences to help us form a stable and secure sense of self. It helps us understand that things can happen to us or around us, but it is not a reflection of us. This means that something can happen and I feel guilty or shameful, but that does not mean that I am a guilty or shameful person. It also means that something very upsetting can happen, like a loss or a disappointment of some sort, and I can feel depressed. But this does not mean that I am a depressed person. And if I made a mistake and I get reprimanded for it or I feel guilty or bad for it, it means that I made a mistake. It doesn't mean I'm a person that is worthy of reprimand or punishment. A description for this is like we are the sky and the emotions are the weather. So the emotions can come and go and happen to us and through us, but they do not stay and they are not us. And another helpful visual is that our emotional experiences are on a conveyor belt on our brain. And in order to bring it forward to the front of our brain to process it and regulate it and let it go, we have to label it. So we have to label it to bring it forward, and then it processes, and then we can let it go. This is the same for the subconscious. If we don't label that emotion and keep it moving and come forward and process it, it becomes part of our subconscious, which means it becomes part of us. So just remember, things can happen that you feel guilty for, that you feel angry about. Mistakes can happen, but just remember these are emotional experiences. They are not who you are as a person, and you can process them and let go and separate yourself from them. They happen to us, but they are not us. So any subconscious messages that you have and ties to those emotional experiences that you have can all be healed and worked on. You do not have to suffer with those emotional messages or the patterns that they tend to create through life. I hope this video has been helpful. Take care of yourself and stay gold.